Hello and good afternoon. It's Monday the 1st of July and I've travelled to Dublin to meet with Maura. And those of you that follow my page will know that I interviewed Maura some months ago. She is a retired social worker and I suppose you could call her a whistleblower. And last Saturday week Maura travelled to Athlone to the meeting that we had of women from all over Ireland whose children have been taken by TUSLA. And I have had many chats with Maura, and the other night we were in conversation on the phone and I found that we were sort of arguing with each other over the future direction of how TUSLA should go. And I said, wouldn't it be wonderful, Maura, if we could sit down and have this conversation, because I think it's a conversation that we need to have as a nation. And I suppose Maura has been on a journey for a number of years. I'll just hold this up to the camera and Deirdre, who's on camera, will tell me if the camera is picking this up. That there is Maura, and she's on a demonstration outside Leinster House. And I'm just going to read some of the posters there. Maura's poster is "Stop Children Being Abused by HSE. I can tell how the state failed." The next one is "The HSE has the deaths of 188 children on their hands. What is the future for my 4 grandchildren?" Then another lady has a photograph of Danny Talbot and it says "Victim of the HSE." And then in the background there's another banner saying "Area 6 and 7, ignore phone calls, shame on you." So Maura, maybe we could begin by asking you to give me the background to this this photograph. When was that, or where was it?
That was in 2010 outside the Dáil. And that, if you remember back to my other blog, is that what you call it?
Yes.
It was at the deaths of the children in care. And I, you know, in terms of some of the children, I feel there should have been criminal
Yes, that's okay, Maura.
convictions, because it was a real criminal neglect. But as I say, nobody was held accountable really for all that. And because of the deaths of children in care, that's as you know, that Fine Gael, who were in opposition, supported this family here. Danny Talbot's family were meeting with them and eventually set up a working party acknowledging that the system had failed and that it wasn't fit for purpose. And this was as a result of partly this demonstration as well outside the Dáil.
Okay, and in your last video with me, you said that Alan Shatter actually spearheaded the setting up of that committee. Fine Gael were in opposition at the time, and they came up with a number, and you were on that committee. He invited you to sit in on that committee and take part in it. And you eventually came up with a number of recommendations, and one of them was to set up an agency outside of the HSE, which would be exclusive to children, because at that time the care of children wasn't really the remit of any particular department within the HSE. Is that correct?
Well, what basically happened was that when the HSE took over in 2004, when they set up the Health Board, that's when the area Health Board ceased to be in existence. They set up legislation, and the legislation seemingly made the HSE almost an impregnable source, and people couldn't kind of comment on it the way it was set up on its own. And even the Minister for Health didn't seem to have any say over it, which was Mary Harney. And also the junior minister, really, didn't seem to have any say in anything. And when all this broke out, they were caught like rabbits in headlights. I don't know if you remember all that. They nearly had to go to court to get information from the HSE on the children.
Okay, so maybe if we go back, because I'm a great believer in learning the lessons from history. You worked as a social worker when you had the old health boards,
yes,
prior to the setting up of the HSE. Was that a better model?
You see, it's very difficult to say it was a better model because it evolved. The first health board was actually set up in 1970. That was when they took it away from the, which was the cruelty man, for want of a better word, the ISPCC. Right. And they developed the health boards in 1970, and they did it on the English model the English and Welsh model, not the Scottish model, which is slightly different, the English and Welsh model of child protection. And it evolved from that, and they built up. But see, the problem is, and I've realised this now, and I hadn't realised that at the time, the problem was that, and I'm only talking here, I want to tell you that now, about frontline community care social work. I'm not talking about any other things they've got going like metal and stuff like that, because I don't know enough about it. My whole experience almost entirely has been in all kinds of community care frontline social work.
Right, that's what you did. You were a social worker
I was
on the front line.
Because I had a firm belief that experience should remain on the front line. And they're always saying this is the banter you hear out of the authorities, but there's lies, damn lies statistics, and they're being economical with the truth, and they're very economical with that truth, because they don't make it easy for experience to stay on the front line, and they don't want it. Because experience like myself on the front line starts to question why we're not allowed to do our jobs properly. We may have a professional training to help children and make assessments, but they have a different kind of a system going that you do as you're told. And this was it developed into, and what social work has developed into now is basically a civil service. It's no longer a social work service, in my opinion. It's become frontline social work I'm talking about. It's become part of the civil service, and that's sad to think that the profession that I was proud to be part of years ago has turned into a civil service, not a social work service. They might as well just give people a list of do's and don'ts, because that's what they do. That's what they've done. They buried the same system that they complained about. They complained about it in so deep down into it that you can hardly see where it is anymore. And they also the same culture. They buried the same culture down into this new agency. And what really annoys me, and I have to say this now this, because I stood up and kept questioning things, because that's the way I believe social work should be. They decided, they told us I were working with dysfunctional families. Then they decided I was a dysfunctional social worker working with dysfunctional families. And then when all this came out about the way the HSE had failed, suddenly the HSE was it was a dysfunctional system with a dysfunctional management and governed by a dysfunctional body, the HSE. And then I was a dysfunctional social worker with dysfunctional families doing that dysfunctional system. It's all, the whole thing would boggle your mind if you tried to think about it deeply.
Okay, so it's kind of difficult to follow.
Okay. But
my understanding of it is, just quickly go through it, that we had the health boards,
yes,
which evolved into the HSE, and that system had become dysfunctional.
Yes.
And children were dying in care.
Wrong system.
Yeah, wrong system. Children were dying in care, and then there was calls for reform, and that reform came about with the setting up of TUSLA in 2014.
Yes.
Now, where did it all start to go wrong with the setting up of TUSLA?
Now, the person who actually set up TUSLA wasn't Alan Shatter.
Right.
The person who set up TUSLA was Frances Fitzgerald.
Right.
And what she did basically was she took all the old culture and the old system that they said themselves was so wrong within the HSE, and they buried it deeper in TUSLA. And you see, what they're doing now is they have a corporate management system with business methods. And you know what really, I mean, it befuddles my mind again. How can child protection be a business?
So it has become a business.
It has become a business, and a lot of people are dependent on this. I've only started to realise this now, just how bad it is. A lot of people are dependent on this business. For instance, you have, first of all, of course, you have the social workers themselves who are dependent on it for a livelihood. You have the whole stream of management going way up, and I think they've managed them for sneezing now at this stage, who are dependent on a whole big, 770 odd million, are dependent on this whole system staying as it is. You have also the GALs, guardian items, getting a lot of money out of that.
€125 an hour.
Yeah.
And one of them earned €300,000 for the year a couple of years ago.
I would believe that. And
yes.
you have psychologists, you have counsellors, all tied into this system. They tied them all into this system. And you've also called the legal system. I mean, the legal system's thriving on this. I mean, there was no children being taken into care. I mean, a lot of people would be scratching their heads and saying, how do we earn money out of this?
So it has become adversarial.
And the private foster homes as well.
And the private foster homes. And now we have a situation where there are private companies now who are
Yes.
contracted by TUSLA
Absolutely.
to foster the children, and one of those is Foster First Ireland, and they are getting €58,000 per child.
Yeah.
And then they place the child in a foster home and they pay €320 odd to the foster family. So you have
a business. Child protection in this country is a business. Imagine if if anybody said that to me years ago when I was starting off, that child protection is a business, I would say, well, I have no business being in a business if that's what child protection is. I'd have gone up and maybe been an entrepreneur or something. You know, I would never have got involved in social work. And the way it is set up now, I would never get involved in it. I would never ever go near social work now the way it is.
Okay, so there are a number of people who have actually called for TUSLA to be disbanded, and they have said that it's not fit for purpose. And I know that the recent court case in Galway involving the children that were raped in foster care, the solicitor acting on behalf of those children who are now adults, you know, has put huge question marks over TUSLA, and he's just one. The Children's Ombudsman Niall Madoon has spoken about TUSLA. The UN Raconteur on children that have been sexually abused who came to Ireland last year, she has issued a report which is hugely critical of TUSLA. So I'm not going to go into all of that. So I suppose really what I've heard you saying is that the culture that's in TUSLA now is a culture that we have inherited going back to the 1970s.
Yes.
The culture has not changed.
No.
Secondly, you now have a massive business which has been set up, and that business is dependent on the taking of children from their parents.
That's what it seems like to me.
And thirdly, that frontline social workers are no longer able to work as social workers as they would have in your young days.
Yes.
They are now just glorified civil servants.
That's what they are, basically, yes.
Now, the big question, and this is the conversation that I want to have with you, we've established that TUSLA is not fit for purpose and there are huge problems with it. And there are people now calling for it to be disbanded. But you and I know that you cannot demolish something without having something to replace it. So what do we replace it with? Now, and this is where we started to argue the other night on the phone. I said that the structure is there and that the structure can be reformed from within, so that if we introduce what I would call ACT, accountability, that people within the system are made accountable for their actions. C, that competency. A lot of people are employed by TUSLA because of who they know and not what they know, so that we need to have a system where people are actually competent to do the jobs they're supposed to do. And thirdly, transparency. There is no transparency. There's no freedom of information, and the family law courts are held in camera. So I'm saying that really our fight now should be to look for all three of those, you know, accountability, competency and transparency, and you disagreed with me.
Well, I disagree with you on the basis that it's the wrong system. So how can you actually reform a system that's the wrong system? My starting point is that you get rid of 3/4 of the management instead of building a whole. Now this is going to be very difficult because people are dependent on for their jobs. Some people do their best within that system. I want to say that I'm not criticising everybody. There's some good and bad people in every system, and some people do their best within that system. And I just completely trying to reform a system that's not. The basis of it is not fit. It's not fit to protect children because it depends on, for instance, rules and regulations. There's more rules and regulations than I had hot dinners. I mean, for instance, social workers can't move a muscle without having to cover their tracks. They have to, 80% of it, the time is writing reports and covering their backs, and very little time is given over to actually meeting with families and all that. So they're under huge restrictions in that regard. They're also told what to do. They have to follow set procedures by their management. Even though I might think this is terrible, I can't do this, and I have to go off and say this is the way this should be done, they're told to do it. Make no mistake about it, they're told to do it. And I don't know what they're training social workers in nowadays, but it seems to be very they must be trained in being compliant. That's all I can think, and just follow the rules and regulations. And I think this is a huge problem, because where is the advocacy in all this? Where is the advocacy on helping people to speak out? It's not there because they don't want anybody criticising the system. They do not. And I mean, a lot of people are earning their living out of this system and children being taken into care, then there's something dramatically wrong with it. So I think a lot of the management can go, and yes, do put it outwards instead of upwards. Stretch it outwards and make sure that the bonuses are given to experienced people who want to stay on the front line, and let them do their job as social workers. Let them actually protect children. Now, what they appear to be doing, and I can only gather from what I'm hearing, is they appear to be setting up so many systems, so it's a one-fit-all thing. If you lose it, for whatever reason, your children are taken into care, instead of giving them back right away, what they seem to be doing is putting them into foster care, and then making it very difficult for people to get them back. They have all these groups, which some place down in Bessborough, is it, that nuns have to make sure you're a good mother, and somewhere else you have to go through a whole series of hoops to get your children back, instead of trying to make sure the children go back straight away and then support them in the home and work them through that. They seem to be making it very difficult even for them to go home. But then if you have contracts with private fostering and all kinds of money on that, then of course you're going to produce the children to give to them. I mean, I'm not saying that's what they're doing, but to me it seems very sinister the way they're approaching all this. I just find the whole thing, where's the community in all this?
Okay, so just to recap then on what I have heard you say is that social workers on the front line need to be given the freedom to use their intelligence, to work with their heart.
Yes.
And be released from all the rules and regulations that they must follow.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we need to get rid of that whole layer of bureaucracy that's on top, and we need to replace it with frontline social workers. Now, that's an interesting point. Pat Rabbit, when he appeared before the Oireachtas Committee for Children and Youth Affairs in February, spoke about the difficulty in recruiting social workers. We now have a situation where there are actually more social workers leaving TUSLA than there are joining it. So there is a huge deficit there. And for example, if a mother has supervised access to her children, it's cancelled at the last minute because there isn't actually a social worker available to supervise. So, and it's having a huge impact. The thing that really worries me about TUSLA is the lack of transparency and the illegality of what is going on. Now, I watched videos online this week where social workers in a certain part of this country were running around town handing out summonses to the local court like confetti. Now, that strikes me as something that shouldn't be happening. That it's not the function of a social worker to go chasing people to hand them out summonses. And there seems to be no accountability whatsoever. That when somebody does something wrong, they're not accountable to anybody. There doesn't seem to be any system of accountability.
Well, there isn't within the public service. There isn't. There's no system. It's all to do with cover up for your political masters, because that's what corporate governance is about. You cover up for your political masters, and he who pays the piper calls the tune big time. So you see, this is the interesting thing about unionisation here in this country. I worked abroad so I came back, I had experience abroad, different way of functioning, different way of thinking. It wasn't who's your uncle down the road, and we get him a job, and I know her, and she, it wasn't it like that. And I came back to this country, and I came back to a very small-minded thinking, and everything else to do with that, right? And this was the problem, you see, because within that system, a lot of these managers grew up within that system, and they profited out of it because they kept their mouth shut and they complied up through the system. And a lot of people I knew who were young social workers like me went up through management, and I believed in my naivety that they would change the system. And this is the ironic thing, we're all sitting complaining early 70s about lack of facilities and everything, and then they moved up, and I thought, again, is there a magic door called management, and do they get this thing peppered on them? Because it changed completely, and the same things they were complaining about with us, they started criticising us for complaining about. So there's obviously a management mentality, which is keep them all in order and don't let them complain because you don't want to rock the political boats. That's what all this is about. It's the children are just coincidental to it, and the families that come in are coincidental. And you can't just have one system to fit all, because people have different ways of dealing with things. Everybody, every human being, none of us are black and white, and I know say they're black and white, but anyway, they're not. And
no, that's perfectly acceptable to say that things are not in black and white. Yes,
and they're not. I mean, there's grey areas as well, and you just don't set up a system to fit one thing. You know, you just can't say this is the way you have to go to get your child back. People have different responses to that. You should make it the easiest path to get your child back. You should make the easiest path if you take a child away, get it home immediately, if that's at all possible. I'm not saying there aren't justified reasons for taking some children away, but there's no justifiable reason to keep 90% of them in care either, in my opinion.
Well,
that's my opinion.
One of the things that the mothers are telling me is that when they go into court, that social workers are actually telling bare-faced lies about them. For example, one mother told me that a social worker wrote a report saying that her children were taken from her. She wasn't fit to be a mother. The children actually didn't know what leaves were. Now that mother actually had to go back to the primary school and get artwork that the children had done in school where they did the leaf prints, to bring it back into court the next day to show that the social worker had fabricated false evidence against her to try and keep the children in foster care. Like, I suppose the thing that strikes me from listening to what some of these social workers do to the mothers is this: do they have a heart? How could they possibly do what they're doing? It's so obviously wrong.
But you see, it's not a case of having a heart. What it is I believe now, I don't know what the state of training is now, but I believe they're training social workers to be compliant. And they have a whole list of rules and regulations that you have to follow now. You have to follow. A lot of these younger social workers came in at a time when they were qualified 2 years, they got management posts.
After 2 years?
After 2 years, yeah. So imagine, look, I'm a manager now, you know? I mean, that's the way, and they all just are compliant into the system. And you see, they have mortgages, they have everything else. So of course they're going to be compliant within a system that's keeping them in a job. And I noticed there was a recent recruitment going on, and they were offering social workers full-time contracts, starting at about 40,000 a year. I mean, wouldn't you go into that if you needed a long-term job? And you know, if you kept your head down, you could move up through the ranks. You wouldn't even have to see people anymore, ordinary people, if you move up through the ranks,
right?
You know, wouldn't you? And you have a job for life and a big salary.
And I suppose that really is the nub of it.
But that's the nub of it.
Really is
that
the
is
nub
the
of it. That's it in a nutshell.
It is.
That it is a system that has become a business.
Yes.
It's a civil service.
Yes.
And the days of actually thinking about children's welfare is no more.
No, it's not. It's absolutely really nothing to do with the children, in my opinion. It's to do with the system and keeping compliant and making sure the boat isn't rocked too much and making your political masters look good. And look, they have a whole PR crowd. HR, UR, IR, I don't know what the R's are up there, but they have people in those huge jobs getting money for old rope, is the way I see it. You know, and I just don't understand why we're going with all this.
Now, Maura, and this is a question I haven't asked you before, and I've put you on the spot. Nowadays, it would appear that social workers spend a lot of time in the family law courts.
Yes.
Now, did you have to go to the family law courts in your day?
I did, yes, but it was a totally different setup. I can't believe the setup that's happening now.
Tell me about what it was like in your day.
Well, I could, yes, it was very much a kind of a learning process for everybody way back then. You know, even the judges were learning way back then, you know, it's a family law course. And it was like country courts. I worked for the ISPCC first because there was no, they hadn't expanded into the community care services. And I remember this court case, right, and it was down the country. And we were called down. I didn't know this family, but farmers going past were watching I had to tell you this story, I have to, because we're watching, this woman was living with this guy. He wasn't the father of the children, she had 2 children, and he was a very dominant guy, and he rented a cottage down the country, and farmers going past in their tractors are watching this guy hold his 8-year-old boy up upside down and dipping his head into a barrel of water outside. So they made a complaint to us because we were the body, the ISPCC, and I went down not knowing what I was finding. And I recognised the mothers. Now this is the other thing, a lot of the women, not them all, but a number of the women I dealt with had special needs of one situation or another. So it was quite clearly this woman couldn't stand up to this guy, and we had to take the children. We went to court, and it was very much like the judge knew everybody around, and the judge knew the nuns, and knew the nuns, and I won't go into all down there where it was, or the nun or anything, but I'll never forget this. We said that these children need to be taken off this man. Now, I didn't particularly want to put them into care, but we had no alternative then, that stage, what the cruelty going on. And for farmers going past to make complaints, that you can show the level of what they were seeing and stuff. So the mother wasn't able to cope, and he was very dominant, vicious guy.
So a care order was made?
No, we went to court, and the judge said, oh, I don't know, I don't think I'll be taking kids in. No, this is just a story I'm telling. Kids into care, and I said, well, we don't want to do this either, but we've no choice for the moment till we sort out what's going on. And the nun, we were placing the kids up, and she said to just look here, Jimmy. Jimmy, this I'm telling you now. Okay, he said, okay, sister so and so. I won't say who she was. Okay, and he made the order. That was one court. But generally, the courts were they talk to you, they talk to the social, they try and talk to the parents as well. They tried to do that way back then in the courts because they were all learning. And they did have a level of interest in the parents. And they did try and not. I mean, very rarely did I have to actually, myself, take parents to court, take the children off them. Often it was the parents themselves who wanted to go and put their kids into care for whatever reason. I tried really hard not to take the parents off the children. Or the children off the parents, I should say. And so it was very much that. There was an interaction in the courts.
Well, do you know something? I think you've actually hit the nail on the head. Because back then, it was a case of people knowing each other. There's an old saying that it takes a village to raise a child.
That's what I feel, and that's what's lacking. That's hit the nail on the head.
Yes. It takes a village to raise a child. And what is actually happening now is that the mothers that I'm dealing with fall into 3 broad categories. They are mothers who are homeless and the children are taken off them. They are mothers who are victims of domestic violence, and the husband or partner is breaking the barring order, and TUSLA step in and take the children for the children's own care, own welfare. And the third group are women who grew up in the care system themselves, and they are watched like hawks. They are known to social workers.
Oh, I know that.
And when they become mothers themselves, the social workers immediately step in and they put them under horrendous pressure, and they hound them until eventually they take the children off them. So I suppose the society that you and I have grown up in has changed.
Oh, dramatically.
It has gone from a rural society to an urban society for the most part, where people live anonymous lives in cities and towns, and mothers find themselves with no supports from their family, no supports from their neighbours. And I suppose we have to get back to that model.
Yeah. And you see, once they label you, anybody labels you, you're labelled for life. They don't see if they label you as inadequate, or they label, we've all been labelled as something or other. And they label you like that, you can either live like that and believe you're no good, or you can try and fight back. Now, I have no problem with the people fighting back now for whatever reasons, maybe, whatever they're doing. I feel if I was a mother, I'd probably be out there fighting like they are some as well.
Yes.
Because I can understand the frustration. I can totally understand that.
I suppose really, to clarify, you're talking about the, I suppose many people in the last 2 weeks, we'll say, has taken to social media to tell their story and so on and so forth. So what we're saying is that we can understand their frustration.
If I was a mother in that position, I'd probably be joining them, I'll be honest with you. But that's just me, you know, because I always stood up and for what I believed in. And I feel more than ever now, the complacency is unbelievable from the general public about all this. They do not understand what the industry that is now child protection. I just, what can I say?
That's a very interesting point. That's a very interesting point, Maura, because I have actually noticed that myself on my page, that there was interest there in the beginning around the coverage that I was doing of these mothers and their plight. And I'm starting to see that interest is starting to wane, because people are saying, oh, this is too terrible, this is too awful, it's too painful, you know, it doesn't affect me, I don't want to watch. And they're switching off.
Yes, that's what people do.
So I suppose that's something else that needs to happen. There has to be an appetite from the general public for the system to change for these mothers before it's going to happen. Yes,
but I think also it's important that they keep hammering at it, because otherwise there'd be the system wouldn't even, they'd be so complacent that they wouldn't even try to attempt to communicate in any level. I think now they're rattled a bit by what's going on, just a bit, not enough.
Yes, and I have to say that Angela Ray, I have to give her a mention, because she is the woman that's kind of spearheading all of this on social media. And I would have concerns myself around people coming on camera and telling their stories, because it's not just about them, it's about their children, and you know, it's all very public and it's out there. But as you said, we can understand.
Oh, absolutely.
We can understand why people are doing this, and it is getting word out there. So it has been a very interesting conversation. To those of you who have just joined me, I've been in conversation here with Maura, a retired social worker who worked first with the ISPCC, then with the old health boards that evolved into the HSE, and Maura was gone before TUSLA was actually formed in 2014.
Can I say one thing though? I want to say one thing. I worked with child sexual abuse most of my life as well.
Really?
Yes, I worked with child sexual abuse most of my life, and I came back to, I heard a lot of denial about it. When I came back to this country in the early 90s, they were still denying it exists to any great extent in this country, onto the whole thing about child prostitution, as you know, and they still denied it. So there's a lot of denial going on as well, and we really need a totally different system to deal with that as well. We really need to, oh yeah, I worked there all my life nearly. All my social work life. I was at other jobs before that, for my social work life.
And do you think there's still a problem in that area?
Absolutely. Oh, huge problem.
With child sex abuse?
Oh, there's a whole huge problem, sure. And with child prostitution still as well.
And child prostitution?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
In Ireland?
In Ireland, yeah. In Ireland. It's no different than any other country in the world. You think it's any different than any other country in the world?
But it's not out there. People don't know
well, it's not out there because it's hidden now. Said that before. The recent legislation on prostitution has pushed it away underground again. And of course there is. There's a lot of... when I worked with in the night service bit for the 15 years, the amount of children being trafficked in... We dealt with you see, we were out of hours, so we often had children come in through the airport at night, and a lot of these children were being trafficked. And I knew I was sitting beside boys and girls, by the way. I want to say now, boys were also abused in that fashion, and boys and girls being trafficked into this country for all kinds of reasons, and one of them was sexual exploitation. And I sat in taxis coming from the airport thinking, here am I'm trafficking children into this country. This is appalling. We're the child trafficking centre of Europe at one stage. Probably still are, I don't know about that, but we were then. Appalling stuff went on.
And so you were called into the airport to pick up these children?
Well, we were the out of hours, you see.
The out of hours service. Yeah. And where did the children go after that?
Well, they were in all kinds of places. They went into hostels, and some of the hostels were grossly inappropriate. I won't even talk about them in the beginning. And then they set up private hostels. And I could tell you stories about them too, because I could stay here all year talking about the way the system has messed up on children. I could sit here all year. But you see, now that they have all these rules and are bombarding you with all this kind of stuff, goes on underneath it is really what's happening. It's not the face stuff to tell you with all this, that and the other. It's actually what's going on underneath. On the front line is the reality. And you'll never hear about that because they're not allowing to hear about it, because they stifle social workers.
So,
and that's what I tell you, there's 3 ways you can whistleblow. Just briefly, I'm going to tell you this. One is the individual solicitor or whatever, or psychologist who has a client that's been hard done by, or hard done by themselves, and they will criticise the system and take on TUSLA. And with them are the politicians. But they all have private practice, they won't lose their homes, right? If the congregation, or whether it's an NGO or a religious congregation who do good work, and they can criticise some of the practices going on, and they won't lose their homes, they won't. But see, this is the whistleblower inside the system will lose everything if they whistleblow. So that's why people do not whistleblow in these systems, because they lose everything if they do whistleblow, their homes and everything else. So that's the other issue. You can have all the whistleblower legislation you want, but I can tell you a lot of people just keep their heads down and get on with it as best they can.
Well, Maura, it has been a fascinating conversation with you. To those of you who have been watching, thank you. To those of you who have just joined me, I think you'll have to go back to the start of the video and watch it. I have been in conversation with Maura, a retired social worker, and we have been discussing what is wrong with the childcare system in Ireland and how we can fix it. I'd ask you please to subscribe to my YouTube channel. It doesn't cost anything. There's no payment method or anything like that. You'll never be asked for money. It's just that I need 1,000 subscribers to be able to go out live on the YouTube platform, which is a much better platform than Facebook. And I suppose the other thing that I'd ask you to do, please, is to share this video so that we can get word out there to a much wider audience about what is actually happening in this country. And by liking and sharing the video, you're actually showing that you are concerned about the welfare of children in Ireland. So, thank you very much for watching.